Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today is December 2nd. It is 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern in the United States. This is our 10th session in our Primo V Become an Expert series, and our topic today is external resources. Let's go ahead and get into this. We're kind of getting pretty familiar with each other throughout this series. Our topic is loading external data sources into Primo V. So before we get into loading external data into Primo V, we're going to understand I'm going to talk about what external records are and how they're different from internal records in ALMA. And then we're going to get into, we're going to get into the different tools to manage these records, import the records, expose them, clean them up. And these are the same tools. If you've been working with cataloging or acquisitions, these are the exact same tools. This is the benefit of Primo V being built on the ALMA platform. Normalization rules, if you've worked with those, it's the same tool. It's just we're normalizing this external data instead of the internal data. So we're going to be creating normalization rules. We have a nice little test utility that's baked in, as my UK colleagues say, baked in right into ALMA. I love that phrase. We're going to be then talking about creating normalization process tasks. Remember how if you make a normalization rule in ALMA, it doesn't do anything until you add it to a process. And a process could have one normalization rule or multiple, just whatever the situation calls for. And then we'll get into the import profile. So, and you may be already familiar with import profiles for bringing in acquisitions data, bringing in cataloging data, inventory information. And so then we'll talk about configuring an import profile, running an import profile, taking a look at the data we've pulled in via Primo, and then how to clean it up later in the future. Okay, so starting with the overview, we have library collections or internal records. So those are the records that were loaded into ALMA during your data migration process, during implementation, plus any other records that you've cataloged or imported into ALMA as part of your workflow. So internal records can also be records that are loaded into ALMA via ALMA Digital, also called ALMA D. So some of you might be ALMA Digital customers, but not everyone is, and you don't have to be. Not everyone needs that functionality. After these records are loaded into ALMA, the records are stored, managed, retrievable, editable, maintained in ALMA. Any of these local records, internal records, they go immediately into Primo. They're exposed immediately and then indexed within 15 minutes after they're updated in ALMA. So sometimes it takes a little bit just to get them fully indexed. And then we have external records. So external records are records from sources that are not currently loaded into ALMA. If you're not an ALMA digital customer, but you do have digital repositories of your digital content, you can still make them discoverable in Primo V. Help expose them, let people, they can then search Primo V and still, the link takes them back to wherever they're stored, whether it's like Content DM or DSpace, whatever that platform is where you actually hold the images, hold the metadata, manage them, all of that information. So external records are loaded into Primo V via discovery import profile. So if you take discovery off of that, you just see import profile. So they're just specialized for these kinds of records. And we'll see how this is done later in the training session. The original records of external resources are not managed or maintained or viewable in ALMA. They're maintained out in that source system. And so this means periodically you may need to update the data in ALMA with the records from your source system. If you continue to grow that those digital assets, those external assets in that other system, you're going to want the new information you generate, update, improve to be reloaded into PrimoV. The records themselves are not editable or visible in Alma after loading into PrimoV. When the records are loaded, they're mapped into Dublin Core for Alma to process, and then PrimoV indexes and displays the records in that user interface. So we have two different supported data formats to do this. We can either use Dublin Core or XML. So the Dublin Core records are loaded and stored in Alma in a proprietary format, but those existing 55 fields in Dublin Core are already mapped to that format. So you don't have to worry about any mapping for the standard Dublin Core fields. Remember, we don't write the rules, we write to the rules. So Dublin Core is an established metadata format, and so we have written to that standard and done that mapping for you. However, we also have a way to map up to 50 non-standard fields into local fields. And then we use the distinction or the labeling here, the designation discovery.local01, discovery.local02, 03, 04, on up to 50. So if you do have some non-standard fields in that external system, they can also be brought in, indexed, available here in PrimoV. Please note, if you do have non-standard fields in your Dublin Core data, they will be disregarded if they're not manually mapped into those fields. And we've also included a way to map your resource types to the resource types that exist in Primo. There is a field, DC:type, so Dublin Core type, that you can use to indicate a resource type, and in some systems, or in some circumstances, this may map directly to its equivalent type in Primo, but it also might contain certain resource types that are more specific to the ones that I'll display in Primo. You might have a type DC, Dublin Core type field might indicate that the material is a poster, but the resource type in Primo would be image. So for this reason, with the tool that we have in this mapping, you can retain the information of that type of poster while still mapping to a different value for discovery.resource_type field if needed of image. So that's the Dublin Core side. And then on the XML side, you could do that as well. However, to load records in XML, you'll need to map the fields in the XML records to the standard Dublin Core fields, as well as any local discovery fields that you want to include. So you need to identify and define the tags that indicate the beginning and ending of each record. So a little more work, but definitely doable if that's how your data is stored. So let's take a look at the steps involved in loading external records into PrimoV. Oops. I'm making sure I'm getting my notes here. There we go. So first, we need to define normalization rules. These are the rules that determine how the source data gets mapped into Dublin Core, into the Dublin Core record. Most of these fields are already mapped, but there are a few that still need to be configured, such as linking information, resource type field, any non-standard fields that you might want to include. Then what do after we create a normalization rule? We test it. We make sure that the behavior, that outcome is exactly what we expect. And if it needs to be changed, updated, we can go back to the norm rule, make those corrections to make sure, it's doing what we want. Software isn't smart. It's just listening to what we tell it to do. Once the normalization rules are in place, then we have to create the process. And so this is just like normalization rules for internal records. A normalization rule doesn't do anything until it's added to a process, and a process may have one or more normalization rule, and you can definitely test that process in the same interface that we can test the normalization rule. So one place to go to test both of those. Then we need to go, so that's all about normalization rules. Then we jump over to the import profile side of the process. So the discovery import profile is configured. This import profile defines the information needed to load the data into Primo V, such as data source, method of file transfer, when to load the new data, how often to load the data, and more. And then the discovery import profile is run, and that will then expose the, import the data, expose it out into Primo, make it usable, searchable, retrievable for your users. Okay, so let's get into the normalization rules side of this series, okay, or this workflow. So let's get, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to come back to this slide when we get to a particular, there we go. We get to a particular part of our demo here. Okay, so where do we access this? If you look under configuration, under discovery, this is where we're going to be spending most of our time here, loading external data sources. So it's in the configuration menu under discovery, and we're going to start with loading external data sources. I'm sorry, we're going to start with normalization rules for external data sources. It's our first step. So this will bring me into the metadata editor. And so if you've been working with normalization rules, you'll see them up here. We're on the rules tab here. And it'll automatically, because we came at it from this link, it's almost automatically going to bring us to this normalization discovery limit or, file here under this tab. And so just like other normalization rules, we have a private normalization rule. So if I'm working on something, I'm testing it, I'm not ready for other people to see it, use it, I might have it stored in my private folder. Shared means shared amongst my colleagues in my institution. And so once a normalization rule has been created, tested, you put it in the shared folder, and then that means other people can use it, or it can also be added to, when we talk about the normalization rules and process, something needs to, the rule needs to be in the shared folder. It won't work from a private folder. So those rules do need to be here. And then we have the community folder. And so what you'll notice here is there are different rules here. And instead of having multiple folders or lists, all of the normalization, the discovery normalization rules are in the same folder. And there's just a flag, whether it's a Dublin Core or an XML rule. So that is where that is determined. If I come down here, the ones that start with EXL, again, those are the ones that we have put out there into place for you to utilize. And then the other ones are put out there by customers. And if I come in here, I can always view a rule. I can, let's go, where did that go? That was LibGuides. There we go. I can duplicate a rule. Maybe I want to duplicate it. I could copy. So if I duplicate it, then I can paste it up into my shared folder. And then I can always see the properties too. And so the properties, here's that format, the type of normalization rule it is. Here's its name. Here's its description. Is it a Dublin Core XML? Is it private or shared? That determines, can other people see this? And remember, nothing goes to the community folder unless you contribute it to the community zone. So things don't just magically pop over there, but if you have created a normalization rule that you think would be helpful, you can always contribute it to the community zone as well. Same functionality that you're used to seeing with these other normalization rules. So let's take a look. I've already copied this one up here into my shared folder. So map Dublin Core type to discovery resource type syntax. So just like other normalization rules, when we looked at this one for LibGuides, there was just one rule in here. One thing, do it, and it's over. But you can also layer a number of normalization rules inside of a single normalization rule. So what we're doing here is we are saying, because what we're trying to do, we're trying to take that Dublin Core type and map it over to what Primo has available for types. And I can see if, so here's our rule name, and here's our when, and our condition, then, and here's our action. So if that incoming Dublin Core type equals article, then we're going to set it to the articles resource type in discovery. If that incoming record or the incoming type is research paper, we're also going to put that to articles. We're going to set that to articles for discovery resource type. For book chapters, it's going to go to books. For book, it's going to go to books. For chapter, it's going to go to books. And you can see on down the line. So when this normalization rule gets run, Alma, or when the record comes in, it'll go through this, and whichever one it hooks on, it'll set that discovery resource type and then move on to the next phase of the import. Okay, so now I could save and test this right here, but instead what I want to do is I want to show you, let me show you something here. I've got another page open here, and this link is it's in the PowerPoint, but I'll also share it here in the chat. There we go. So this is a link that is talking about the syntax configuring normalization rules for external resources in Primo V. So there's a lot of helpful information here talking about what are the supported resource types in Primo V. As I scroll down, mapping to local discovery fields and what it looks like. Here's our rule name, our condition, and then our action. Creating normalization rules. Now these screenshots are from the previous MD editor before we had that update. And so I did send in some feedback to our doc team to please update these screenshots. So remember, if you see something like that, you see something that, out of date, not, I've seen not clear images, and they can tidy those up. Something that you think might need to be expanded, you can always send that feedback, and it goes right to our doc team, and they'll follow up with you as long as you put your name in there. So, and I always do that. Talking about the normalization rule syntax, the conditions, and on down the line. So this is a helpful piece of documentation. Okay, go ahead and close that. Okay, so I've got my rule here in my shared folder. We just took a look at it. Now, like I said, I could test it right here, but what I'm going to do instead, under the discovery menu, under configuration, you'll see something here that says test normalization rules. So here's our little vehicle, our utility to go ahead and test these rules. Testing external discovery records. Ours is Dublin Core. We need to look for a file. If I come in here, and I'm going to use this one, I've just got a few different files in here. And you first, once you locate the file, you designate the file here, you do need to click upload, and then it will show down here. So this is that incoming information, all in Dublin Core. Now, what are we testing? Are we testing a normalization rule? And here are the normalization rules available. Are we testing a normalization process? And then these are the normalization processes available. So we are sticking with the rule, and I go ahead and click Run Test. So on the left, we still see that source record as it is, no changes. And then when it's been normalized, what has changed? Well, nothing has changed here until we get down to this. Here's what the normalization did. It took that discovery resource type, and let's first notice that the type up here is research paper. It is still research paper over here after the data has been normalized, but that discovery resource type falls under articles. So that's what the normalization rule is supposed to do. It's doing as expected. So success. If something was wrong, I'd need to go back and correct the normalization rule, save it, and then come back here and retest. Or if I wanted to test on additional records, I could do that as well. Okay, so we've got our normalization rule created. We've got it tested. Now we're up to creating processes. I just saw a question pop up. Can you test rules that are in the private folder? You know, I don't have anything in there, so I just have to go test it. If we have time at the end, I could go move one of those in there and give it a shot. I'm just not sure. I haven't done that. Okay, so let's go to configuration, discovery, and now we're going to do the normalization process task. And so this is the same process list that you're used to for other normalization processes. It's just limited down to us by default to discovery bib records. It's the same form, just that business entity is selected to filter down the resources. So let's look at this one, normalized JD data source. That's the one I've been using. It's discovery bib records. Now, if I hadn't already set this up, I would add a process and walk through the wizard to do this, but let's look at what I've created. So I'm going to go ahead and click on edit, and this is going to bring me into the process. And just like anything else, I had to give it a name. I had to give it a description. You have to set it to active or inactive. Remember, it has to be active in order to be able to run it, to choose it. And then on the task list, so the only tasks to add are these DC import drools normalization. And if you only have one normalization rule to run, that's fine, but you can also add multiple ones because maybe you have two different normalization rules that you want to run. So then you would just add another one, and then on the task parameters, you choose, we're mapping DC type to resource type, and then maybe if I wanted to add one of these other ones as well. And I don't want to do that, but it is possible, just like other normalization rules. So if you have multiple norm rules to run, you just layer them in here. Again, be aware of the order of them. You don't want to have one rule create something and the next one to wipe it out, to scrub it. And then just those parameters. Okay, so I'm going to hit cancel because I've been clicking around in there. So we have created our process. So we've added a normalization rule to a process, which makes it usable. And now that we've gone through that, now we need to start talking about import profiles, because that is one place you can use a normalization rule, is in an import profile. So where we do that, still under configuration, still under discovery. It's unusual that everything's in the same place, isn't it? So let's look at discovery import profiles. So these are those same import profiles that you've been using for cataloging. Again, when we come in through this door, if you will, this click, it's just automatically, almost automatically limiting it down to that profile type of discovery. I could click on all and see all of them in this environment. Ebooks, order, discovery, repository. But So limiting it down to discovery, I'm going to see only the ones relating to discovery. And let's do this JD external records load. And let's go take a look at what this import profile looks like. So import profiles, the same import profiles you've been using for other parts of ALMA. I've given it a name. A description is optional. The data source code. So this is where am I getting my record, my record data source, and then a name. And once you set the data source code, you cannot change it. You see how that's grayed out. You do need to identify the originating system. Where are these records, from where are these records coming? So DSpace, Content DM, and others, what we have in here. Now, how are we going to get them in here? Is it going to be a manual upload of files? That's what I'm going to do today. But remember, you can also set up an FTP or an OAI harvest, OAI PMH, and activate it and determine how often you want it to run. So it's not something that you have to come in here and do. We either, with FTP, you would let that external system go dump it on the FTP server, and then ALMA would go get it. Or with OAI, you're just telling it to run, and you would need to fill in these details. So for our session today, I'm just going to do a manual upload, so I'm going to leave it here because I don't want to fill in the other stuff. So what is the physical source format? This is coming in as XML. It's going to be Dublin Core, target format Dublin Core, and then it's active. So I've got a handful of records. Let's go to normalization. And then this is that normalization process. Normalize JD data source. And then, so delivery, we do need to do a little bit of editing here. So the link to resource, the link back to that resource, remember, it's not in ALMA. So how do we tell when this import profile happens, where to find the link back to the resource? So is it via template or static URL from source? Let's go back to my PowerPoint for a moment. Okay, and then looking at this, we would say, I want to make sure I'm in. I don't want to miss my my notes here. Okay, so you'd use a static link if you knew that your data consistently had a link to the source record in one of the fields. Then we'd fill in the standard link label that we would use for all of the records, and you might not have one unique consistent data field that we could refer to. However, with the record we're using, we have multiple Dublin Core identifiers. One of them is a link. And so what we can do, and one of them is the one we want. What we're going to use is the template method instead of static link. So if we come back here into ALMA, that's why we're choosing template. And then we're pulling in the linking parameter 1. What do we want the link label to read? Link to record. And then down here, a little bit further, we need to update linking parameter 1 because this is linking back to here. And we're telling ALMA, hey, where to go find it in the identifier field. And then we're looking for the string in that identifier field that either starts with HTTP or HTTPS and use that link. So it's going to ignore the other DC identifier tags, but it's going to, if it starts appropriately, that's the link it's going to use. Okay, so that is the setting in here under the import profile. I'm going to hit cancel again because I've been just clicking around in there quite a bit. So we've created our import profile. Now it's time to run it. So one way to run it, I can just come right in here and run. Remember that when we've defined where the file was coming from, we selected upload. So if I click run and I said this was going to be manual, I need to go find the file. And these are some of the files I have. And I think this is the one that gives me the error. I'm gonna come back and show you that one. This one isn't going to give me an error. So I've identified the file. I could put in a label. I could put in notes. I don't have to. And I click add. Then I just go ahead and click submit. This is gonna, now, of course, the bigger the file, the longer it's going to take. I'm on a development server here. So it's still pending. Remember, Alma manages those imports. Okay, it's done. It's completed successfully. Now you can always view the report. One record was processed successfully. If it failed, we'd have a number 1 here. This only had 1 record in the file. And if I preview the record, what I'm going to see here is that MMS ID. And remember, if I search for this in Alma, I'm not going to find it. Because that MMS ID, it's not managed, it's not viewable in Alma. This is where you go, oh, yeah, I'll just look for it here. Nope. But if you come out here to Discovery and search for it, here it is. Reducing risk when tectonic plates collide. It's available online. I didn't have a thumbnail. I could have had it set up a thumbnail. I didn't have one. I come into the full record. I see it's available online. I see the link. I need to fix that little typo. And if I look at the display source record, you're going to see there's that Dublin core data. The MMS ID is up here. So that's how the data has come in, including that discovery resource type. Right in here. And this was a poster. But in Primo, we're limiting it down to images where we, mapped it over to images. Here's the link. Oh, no. Oh, we don't have a real link in here. And then taking that out, that's just going to run you to that link. Now, let me show you. I want to show you because I had an error. I had a file with an error, and I intentionally didn't want to fix it because I wanted to show you this. Discovery import profiles. I used this file. So if I run this, I think it was this one. So as soon as I try to add it, there's a formatting error within the file. And so it's telling you right here. So it won't even load that file. Alma's already checked that. It's a nice little thing to see right there. So, but the files that did go went swimmingly. It might take a little bit to index it, but you could see I could pull it up immediately with the MMS ID. And we saw that raw data, the Dublin core, you could also, do the and show PNX if you want to see that Primo normalized XML out here in Primo. You do also have an option. You'd want to make sure that the data is included in at least one scope. So if I come back in here under Discovery, search profiles, here in my search profile screen, we can see the My Institution scope right here, which is already configured to contain all records that belong to your institution. So any external records that would have been loaded would be included in this by default. You wouldn't have to change that. Now you could create a custom scope. And I started to do this. What did I do? I did something yesterday. Well, here's one, this Dublin Core records. This might have been the one I was doing. So, and then I can add a scope here of Dublin Core records. You know, inventory that is digital or external sources. And so if you have enough content, you know, you think that is a helpful search scope, search profile, you can go ahead and set that up for discovery in your PrimoV. Just another option for you. Now, as you are using this, you might have an occasion where you need to tidy up these records. And so in order to delete external data source records, we can come in here under admin, run a job, and no, wait, admin, yeah, run a job. That's what I want. But I want to limit this down because this is a huge list. Where's the discovery management? There we go. So there is a job here to delete external data sources. And you would just go ahead, choose that job. And now I had two different data sources. I had the JD records or DC repository. So you might have, you know, if you're pulling in records from multiple places, you might have multiple data sources. And I would just go ahead and choose the data source and go ahead and submit this. That will then wipe out that record I just loaded. So if you have multiple data sources that you want to clear out, you would have to run this job more than one time with the different data sources. So that's where that comes from. I'm not really going to run this. Because I just loaded it. I want to leave it in there. Okay, let's get back into here. There were some Knowledge Center resources. Some of the links that I shared, this goes right to the documentation, the whole overview, configuring import profiles for PrimoV, configuring normalization rules, creating normalization processes, deleting what I just did, testing normalization rules. I saw a few questions come in, but Lori has responded to them. I'm going to go in, I'm going to test this discovery normalization rules. I'm going to guess that to say private might not be able to be tested, but let's find out. I'm just going to take one of these like this. Let's go ahead and duplicate it. I'm just going to put my initials in front of it. It's Dublin Core. I want to put it in the private folder. Go ahead and click on save. So here I've got my rule. Okay. So if I do save and test using external record, So this brings me into here. Okay, this did allow this private record to show up. Oh, good. Cool. It did show up right here. That surprised me. You never know. So I know that, so you can test it, but you can't, like I couldn't add this to a process being in the private folder. And then I just want to double check. I'm sure it's going to be the same. Yeah, there we go. So my colleagues shouldn't see that option because it's private to my login, but I can see it because it's in my private folder. Thanks for asking that. Any other questions? Pretty straightforward. These, those same tools that you're familiar with for other parts of Alma, just using them here for these, for this external data, bringing it in directly to Primo. Remember, we do have premium services if you need that. We do have a survey if you have something to say, some feedback. My boss and I definitely look at all these because we're always trying to improve what we do, planning for next year, all that kind of stuff. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your time today, and we'll see you next week to talk about Ferber and Dedo. And we have had some newer functionality that's come out this year, and so I'll definitely be highlighting that to improve the dedupe and Ferberization rules. It's definitely a science. Definitely a science. Well, thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.